assume we're live now then. Josh, tap yes. Okay, good afternoon or evening, and welcome to this, our third edition of Berklee Online Live, a bi-weekly interview series in which you, the listeners, get to ask our amazing guests the questions. I'm here to facilitate, or at least do my best to facilitate, and to get answers to what you want to hear. Upcoming on the show, we'll be pleased to welcome more amazing guests such as the legendary Bob Ezrin, Dweezil Zappa, Meryl Garbus, and Ableton CEO Gerhard Bales. I hope I'm saying that right, with many more guests to follow and to be announced. I'm your host. My name is Benji Rogers, and I'm a father, recovering musician, coffee drinker, and frequent flyer. Additionally to that, I'm a Berklee alumni and current teacher of the Digital Trends and Strategies course for the Berklee Online School, which is an amazing course. And what we're doing here is going to be part of it. And I founded PledgeMusic. I'm currently the CEO of the Blockchain Music Project, as well as a proud board member of the Future of Music Coalition. But we're not here to hear about me. We're here to hear about my amazing guest. It's my great honor to introduce Mr. Tim Quirk. And Tim, since I despair of having my biography read, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how we got to be talking today.
All right. Well, you set a high bar there. I feel like as you were listing all your different things, I was like, God, what am I? I guess I'm a music fan. I'm a musician. I'm a critic. I'm a technologist guy, sort of by accident. My friends and I in high school formed a band to basically play Clash covers in the 80s. And we forgot we were the only people in our town who knew who the Clash were. So we figured if people were going to boo us, they should boo our own stuff. So we started writing our own songs. That band was called...
Who were these people who were booing Clash songs?
Well, they were booing our pathetic attempts to emulate the Clash. So
all right.
They were booing us, not Joe and company. So we started writing our own songs. That band was called Too Much Joy. We self-released our first record in 1987, got picked up by an indie in San Francisco in 88, made a record for them. That got picked up by Warner Brothers, Giant. So we were touring and recording as professional rock musicians for the rest of the 80s and about half of the 90s. And then as the band was winding down, we never officially broke up. We just stopped playing, really, and sort of moved on to other things. I kind of fell into music journalism. And then in the late 90s, there was lots of stuff to write about happening in the online world. And I was going to write a column about this new company called Listen.com, which was basically the first music startup, the first .com that I'd seen that made any sense to me. And they were hiring. And my daughter was just about to start kindergarten. And one of us, my wife or I, had to go back to work full time. So I sort of fell backwards into the .com world. Joined Listen.com. We eventually built and launched Rhapsody, which was one of the first on-demand music subscription services. That went through various weird corporate permutations. We got acquired by Real Networks in 2003. We turned Rhapsody into a joint venture with Viacom MTV Networks in 2007, and then spun it off again as an independent company in 2010. At which point I had become completely like this proselytizer that music was no longer a discrete product that you bought and sold in circular, little plastic units, and instead was becoming a service where people would pay or hopefully pay for access to whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, wherever they were. But it was also clear to me by 2010 that space was going to come down to the big boys. It was going to be Apple and Google and maybe Amazon and maybe Facebook. So Google at the time was getting into online music, so I went over there. I was one of the first people hired within the Android team to help build what eventually became Google Play. My role there went beyond just music. It was head of global content programming, so I was responsible for basically the merchandising of all the digital content in Play, so apps and games and books and magazines and movies and TV shows, as well as music. And I was there till 2014. And part of the main reason I left was that I was watching the 4 years I was there. One of my jobs was sitting in quarterly business reviews with all our digital content partners. So the labels I've been working with forever, but now I was sitting in quarterly business reviews with book publishers and movie and TV studios, and most importantly, app and game developers. And the mobile game developers were making gobs and gobs of money. So I've been watching the music industry, which I considered my industry, just crater over 10 years, 11 years. And at the same time, the gaming industry was absolutely exploding. And as far as I could see, we were selling the same things, digital entertainment products. And the gaming companies had figured out how to make money doing that in a way that the music industry hadn't. So I spent the time I was at Google trying to figure out, what do those guys know that we haven't figured out? And I was egotistical enough to think that I figured it out. So in 2014, I left. I teamed up with a good friend of ours, Brian Calhoun, to found a company called Freeform, which is basically building a platform to make mobile apps for musicians, for labels that will distribute music content. It can do any digital content. We're just starting with music. And we'll basically, and I hate this word. Am I allowed to curse on this? Or do I have to watch my...
Keep it medium.
Okay.
Medium.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hate the word monetize. I sound like a douchebag when I say monetize, but I haven't found a better word to replace it. So basically, freeform apps try to monetize music using, we're not gamifying music, we're just taking all the lessons of free-to-play mobile gaming and how they actually make money and seeing what lessons from them can be applied to the music space.
Gotcha.
So now I'm an tech startup guy.
Awesome. And how does it feel, being a tech startup guy?
It feels, well, I don't know about the tech part, but the startup part feels amazing. We were just talking about this before we went live. You know, I think I've ruined myself. I don't think I can work for anyone else ever again, because even when I screw up, you know, something's going wrong. It feels much better when I'm the idiot who made the mistake than when I'm responsible for some other idiot's mistake. I don't know why that is, but it's a fairly profound feeling.
Definitely. So I want to go back to something, you know, so you shared a lot there, which is extraordinary. So I want to ask one question. What's your first memory of music? What's your earliest memory? The kind of, like, when you go back and, like, music was to me this. Do you have a recollection of it?
Yeah, my earliest memory, my parents had a turntable and they would have cocktail hour when they both got home from work. And we'd sit in the living room and they let me pick the records. So I would put records on the turntable, and, you know, they had like Neil Diamond and ABBA. This was the 70s. And I would almost always pick a Neil Diamond or an ABBA record. But I found that they sounded better when I put them on 45 than on 33.
Right.
So I would basically put my parents' records on and speed them up. And that to me was like what music sounded, when music sounded the best. So when punk came along, when I first listened to the, you know, when the needle dropped on the first track of the US version of the Clash's debut, that to me sounded like what I've been waiting for, what I've been trying to get to by playing ABBA records too fast.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So in one of the things, I was going back through old articles, and I remember there was there's a couple of questions on this, but you said something that really affected me when I first read about it. And you said, and you got hell for it, I think it was actually an FMC summit, where you basically said, you cannot devalue music. It's impossible. And what I think was being missed was, you were working for Google at the time, if memory serves.
Yes.
And so there was this perception that the digital services, which were paying out 70, 80% of their revenue sometimes to the rights holders, were somehow that artists were getting screwed, that it wasn't working for them. What are your thoughts on that now? Do you think that music has been devalued, or do you think access to music has been devalued, or what's the thought?
I think, let me see if I can articulate this less. It's a bit of a minefield here, or at least it is when you're, the weirdest thing to me about my career that I just outlined was, you know, I'm pretty sure I've been consistent throughout it. I'm the same guy. Right.
Yeah.
But things sound different when they're, you know, when front guy from, you know, barely successful punk rock band says this thing, it resonates a lot differently than Google executive says this thing. One can sound, you know, totally mundane and fine, and the other sounds like, oh my God, you know, get the pitchforks. So I approached this as a musician. When I was in Too Much Joy, you know, back before MP3s and everything, I was happy when I went to a record store and saw our CD in the used bin. right?
Yeah.
Because I knew I just had this understanding that someone was way more likely to take a chance on me for $9.99 than they were for $18.99.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to see any money from them buying either of those records, no matter what, right? But if they bought the record and they liked the band, they'd probably buy a ticket to the show. Hopefully, maybe I could sell them a T-shirt. More importantly, I'd get them into my sphere, and they'd become a fan and stick with me for the long haul. So that's the way I've always approached it. And in that FMC talk, the point I was trying to make is basically, I ended up leaving Google to found a company based on the principles in that talk.
Yeah.
When I was in the band, everything we did was a commercial to get people to buy the album.
Yep.
Back in the 80s and 90s. The music video on MTV was a commercial to get you to go buy the record. The concert, the show was a commercial to get you to buy the record. Every interview we did was a commercial to get you to buy the record. I think what people are slowly sort of waking up to in this century is that now the record, in a way, is a commercial for the artist. It's a way to bring you into the artist's universe.
Yeah.
And what I think has happened with digital distribution, it's not good or bad. It just is, right?
Yeah.
And that's, in that FMC talk, what I was trying to say wasn't, it is good that this is the way things are, and things were bad in the past and now they are wonderful. What I was saying is things have changed. And I didn't say this in the talk, but it was clear to me gaming had figured out this change.
Yeah.
I think what's happened is the music industry is undergoing this transition that the gaming industry sort of embraced wholeheartedly, and the music industry has been trying to push it away. And you can't. You just have to accept it and adapt to it. And what it is that the gaming I watched when I was at Play, the mobile gaming industry shifted. When I got there in 2010, there wasn't really such thing as a free game. All the games were paid. And when I left in 2014, like 95% of the games were free to play.
Yeah.
So I watched the entire industry in the space of 2 years do a complete 180 on their business model and start making more money as a result. And what they woke up to is that in the 21st century, free doesn't mean promotion anymore. Free means distribution. They literally give their stuff away and monetize after the fact. And they recognize and accept, hey, only single-digit percentage of the people who access our content for free are ever going to give us any money.
Yeah.
But if you focus on the 3% rather than the 97%, you can literally make $1 billion. Candy Crush Saga made $1 billion a year for at least 2, if not 3 years running. And the crazy thing about that is 97% of the people who installed that game never generated a penny in revenue for the developer. And 70% of the people who installed that game and played it to the very last level, so the most engaged customers they could possibly have, never spent a penny. But basically 3% of everyone who installed it and 30% of everybody who played it to the end generated $1 billion a year. And the music industry sort of has this backwards. So where we focus on the people who aren't paying rather than the ones who are paying. Yeah. So going back to that quote that you were talking about, that's the way I always felt about it. It's not, what I was trying to say is, don't feel like songs are not inherently worth 99 cents, right? Or $1.29. Albums are not inherently worth $10 or $12. They're worth different things to different people at different times and in different contexts. And what digital distribution gives us is this new sort of amazing ability to say, oh, you want to give me more than $1 for my music? By all means, do so. Yeah. And I learned this lots of different things in my career sort of led to this understanding. One of them goes way back to like 2002, 2001, 2002, 2003. Jay, the guitar player at Too Much Joy, and I had this side project called Wonderlick, which was mostly just a studio thing. We were doing it for fun, not for money. And we were putting up, we were basically, it was like the first time I launched the Too Much Joy website, it was like, oh, I don't just want this to be about the past. There should be something new here. So Jay and I got together and recorded a song and threw it up on the website as a free MP3. And sort of as an afterthought, we said like, oh, here's a little PayPal tip jar. If you want to keep us recording, donate some money to the cause. And we made more money in 24 hours giving that song away for free than I ever had as a Warner Brothers recording artist, right? Yeah. Which sounds like amazing, but all that means is I made $0 as a Warner Brothers recording artist. I made lots of money publishing as a composer, literally made 0 pennies in royalties from Warner. Yeah. So as soon as we made our first dollar, I made more money. But there was enough for us to record. Basically, we put up a song a month, and at the end of a year, we had a full album. And this indie label in San Francisco came to us and said, hey, we want to put this out. And we're like, those are rough mixes. We need like $5,000 to mix and master it. And so we came up with this idea on the website. We said, hey, this is going to become a record, but it's not done yet. would you like to pre-order it? And we figured there were a couple thousand people who would pre-order it, and that would get us the $5,000 we needed. And so we said, you know, if you pre-order it, you can name your own price. You can pay literally anything. But here's an idea. Anyone who winds up paying more than whatever the average donation turns out to be will put your name in the liner notes. And so the amazing thing by doing that is nobody paid below cost. You know, the lowest anyone donated was $5. Some people gave us $500, right? And the average, if I averaged it out across all the people who pre-ordered the album, the average was $30. Right? Now, I never in a million years would have had the chutzpah to say my record is worth $30, right? And it's not. And the thing is, it's not worth $30 to most people in the universe. My record is worth $0 or less than $0. I would have to pay them to listen to it. But there was some set of people who cared enough about me and my past and our potential future that just to be a part of it, they wanted to give me more than I would have thought to charge them. So the whole notion of freeform, what was in that Future Music talk was just saying there's a pyramid, right? And the scary thing about digital distribution and music wants to be free and everything is that everybody focuses on the bottom of the pyramid, where basically your music is worth nothing to the majority of people on the planet. And so for them, the first thing you want to do is get them to listen to it, and you will actually pay to make that happen. Right? Or you're not asking them for money, you're asking them for their time, for their attention. And then the next level up is there are fewer people, but it's the subset of all those people on the first tier who will actually give you a little bit of money. You know, maybe they'll play your song on Spotify, or maybe they'll buy a single. And then there's a subset of them on the next tier, right? Who they really like you and they'll give you more money. Maybe they'll spend $10 to get your record. And then the tier above them, there's the subset of them that will come to every show. And then the top of the tier is, the super fans. And the thing about that pyramid is on every tier, there's fewer people, but more money per person. And what mobile gaming is expert at is pushing people up that pyramid, basically identifying the people who will spend more and more money and giving them ways to do so that don't feel like ripping them off. Right.
Sure.
And so I think, with this transition that the music industry is going through, and I'll stop this novel of an answer.
No, it's so good. It's so good.
Is, in the 20th century, we were focused on, you measured success by how many units you sold. And that metric doesn't apply anymore. Now the metric for success is really average revenue per user and growing that over time. Mobile gaming has figured that out. The music industry hasn't. And so what I've focused, the last couple of years of my life on is basically building a platform, a tool set that will give musicians and labels and managers, the tools they need in order to basically maximize their average revenue per user and figure out what that is and how to make it grow.
Definitely. So I want to spin back on a couple of things that you said in there. I mean, so Ryan Leslie, who I was interviewing last week on this, he said the same thing. We're not selling units anymore. You have to get that side of things out of your head. And so as a question, and this was actually posted from Nora Tyrrell, who put this in, about this kind of, why does Google Play's Tim Quirk show such disdain for musicians? I think that's not a fair portrayal, Nora, to your question. I think Tim covered that. But why did musicians get it so wrong? Because, I begin every talk with, when it comes to technology, the music industry has finished just ahead of the Amish. And that's Stan Karn's quote, right? So why do you think musicians got that so wrong? And are you encouraged by what you're seeing in terms of musicians saying, well, hang on a minute, there is something there? Or are you kind of like, why are they stuck in the past? What is it? So why do you think that it was perceived that way at the time? And are you seeing sort of an inflection point now where it's moving towards what you originally thought then?
Honestly, I think we've retrenched a little bit in the wrong direction. I think there was more optimism in the aughts than there is in the teens. I don't have a simple answer for why musicians get it. I would say I'm going to answer this question sort of sideways. I was at an earlier Future Music symposium. I went almost every year. Those things were amazing, right? And I always loved to participate. There was one early on and this was like 2002, maybe 2003, where there was this massive debate about sampling, right? And Sandy Pearlman was there and he was like just raging against it, and people in the audience were raging against it. And to me, Like sampling is just like, you can't, it's like trying to copyright the color blue, right?
Yep.
If someone made a sound and you take that sound and transform that sound and make it something new, that to me, it's just like, it's a tool. Like, you know, musicians work with sounds.
Yep.
So I've never understood this notion that sampling is stealing, right? Like
Yep.
if you look at old records, like say, you know, Paul's Boutique or all the first couple of Public Enemy records, they were creating amazing new works, just taking all these things. It was like walking down a city street and you hear like a saxophone out of this window and some thumping bass out of a car going by. It just felt alive, right?
Yeah.
And part of the fun was saying like, oh, that's the theme song from a cartoon I used to watch on Saturday mornings. It was just all these cultural references being sprinkled throughout songs. And somehow, and after the Bismarcky decision, you know, this judge literally quoted the Bible saying, "Thou shalt not steal," in this terrible, horrible decision that basically ended sampling as we'd known it in the late 80s, early 90s. And ever since then, the sampling that you get is like, oh, it's so expensive to license a sample.
Yeah.
Now people just take the hook from an old song and make it the hook of the new song. And so basically, accidentally, they've created the world they were afraid of. This sounds like a tangent, but I'm going to try to tie it back.
Yeah.
So at this Future Music Policy Summit, I was talking to Jenny Toomey, who at the time was the executive director of the FMC. And I was like, why is everybody so up in arms about this thing? Like she goes, oh, well, she goes, I think when you're a musician, you just feel that you have so little that is your own. You're taken advantage of by promoters, by publishers, by labels, by fans, you know, and it's so hard to make any money. The feeling is that all you have is your music. And so as soon as you feel even the one thing that you personally control slipping away, you know, there's this sort of knee-jerk reactionary reactions to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why I wouldn't even say musicians get it wrong. I would just say there are so many people that take advantage of musicians in so many different ways. It's entirely appropriate to be skeptical of some douchebag Google executive standing up there saying, don't fetishize the past, right?
Yeah.
That's why I think I got that headline. I mean, frankly, I got the headline because it's a clickbaity headline and it's a lazy way of thinking and a lazy way of framing it, but it's going to make a bunch of people read the article, right?
Yeah.
I said what sounded like a terrible thing coming from a Google executive, maybe coming from a musician, it sounds a little bit more nuanced, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, what happened is the article that Guardian article was responding to was in Digital Music News. They published the first half of my talk where I basically said, hey, this is the past. Let's talk about the future. They didn't publish the second half of the talk when I went on at great length about all the ways at Google Play I was making money for musicians using these lessons from free-to-play mobile gaming. They just left all of that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I think there's a lie that's been told to musicians for years and years and years, which is, you're and it's this sort of romantic notion that you're this creative genius. You can't be bothered with business and other stuff. There's all these other people that will take care of that for you. And they'll just put you in this cloistered room where you just commune with your muse. And that's all you know, anything else is sullying yourself. And don't worry about that. And, you know, there are so many people who want to make music that it's, you know, you're going to get the lowest possible market rate for your stuff no matter what, or at least in the old model you were going to.
Yeah.
So there's this entire network of middlemen cropping up, just figuring out how to get their cut.
A little slice here and there,
because they are entirely focused on business, and they've sold everyone else, you know, all the creatives a lie that touching business makes you uncreative. So just go off and be creative and let us take care of all this stuff for you. That to me is the most pernicious thing, and that existed before Napster, before MP3s, before an internet, right? That framework was always there. So I think it's so hard to make money making music. Anything that suggests like, oh, you know, these few ways that you knew of, you know, that you rely on in the past, now even they are out the window. That's just an inherently scary thing.
Sure. Okay, so we're gonna switch to the inspiration/artistic questions here, and I just got to know what the answer to this one is. This question from Jeremy Miller. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
That's a famous question. I always go for the duck-sized horses just because I feel like I could stomp on them, you know?
Excellent. Okay, next question is, I liked from Eric Zawada. I liked your series of tweets where you discussed the first tracks on the Talking Heads studio albums and how it reflected their career as a band. How do you think the first tracks from your releases reflect your story as an artist?
Oh, wow. God. I'd have to remember what they are. So
that much inspiration.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Let's see. I think you would hear us, sort of. We start out basically just sounding like our heroes, and very poorly, like a mimeograph of a mimeograph of a mimeograph.
Yeah.
And then we gradually start to figure out who we are. And then it's weird though, because on record 3, that's when we got $150,000 from Warner Brothers to sort of make the record of our dreams. So then we still sound like this garage band, but like, an overproduced, and I use that not as a pejorative. We wanted to be overproduced. We kept telling our producer, Paul Fox, to do all the, we're like, get a glockenspiel. He's like, I don't think this song needs that. We're like, we need a freaking glockenspiel.
And we can have one. So what could go wrong?
yeah, absolutely. And then by the end, you hear us retrenching a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think, early on, we used to tell people we were the Clash with a sense of humor, right?
Right.
And we got a bit of a reputation as a novelty act or a joke band because the jokes were the only thing that we were really good at initially. There was pathos and emotion and other stuff beyond just sarcasm in there. We just weren't any good at revealing it until the end. So, my take on it as the musician, not as a critic. If I was a critic, I'd be probably a lot more dismissive of some of my stuff. Is by the end of our career, we got better at highlighting what was, the different parts of the song that were appropriate at the different times. So I think we got tighter. I would hope we got tighter and more concise and more ourselves from record 1 to record 6, I think.
Yeah. So when you think about this, do you approach your business side of things as a musician? Or do you approach it as a technologist? Do you have both parts of your brain? Because there's been a few questions that kind of touch on this. But, so after Too Much Joy ended from Pat Healy, did you know for certain you wanted to stay in the music business? Or were you considering options in other fields? Sort of where does that lie between the two for you?
Yeah, I would say it's funny because in the band, I was always the guy like insisting we get a receipt from the toll booth operator because we would need it to write off our expenses when we did our tax return. And in business, I was always looked at least by the people above me, I was the weird creative dude, right?
Yep.
Who knew how to, and so what success I've had in the corporate world, I'm pretty sure comes from my ability to explain the value of creative work to bean counters. So I can sort of trade hats, but it makes me suspicious in both fields because when I'm hanging out with a bunch of musicians, I'm this business geek, and when I'm hanging out with a bunch of SVPs, I'm this weirdo, right?
So can I ask a question? So when you're a musician, when you're being with musician head on, you're being creative. When you're in business, it's often not thought of as creative, but my experience is I'm painting on a different canvas. I mean, I made 5 albums, toured for years. I never got signed to Warner Brothers, but I'm owed money from 2 labels. So, but we went it for creative reasons. But so like is the creation of Freeform a different canvas that you're painting on? Do you see it that way, or are they pretty different?
I told in the odds, I was telling people I was as proud of Rhapsody and what Rhapsody was before there was a Spotify, before anyone else was doing this, as I am of any record I ever made. And in fact, when I told you at one point, Rhapsody became a joint venture with Viacom, and so we sort of merged content programming teams, editorial teams, and I found we'd had these 2 completely different approaches because in Viacom, they took all their editorial people and they literally just said, go be creative geniuses. And all the executives will figure out how to make money from your creativity. Whereas at Rhapsody, just because it was a .com, we'd gone through all these downturns. I'd had to figure out how to save jobs. Like I'd become an expert, I think, at explaining how to monetize editorial work, basically. So there was this suspicion from the New York team, the Viacom team, the MTV's subscription service had been called Urge. I think they thought I was this spreadsheet guy who was always, who was more on the business side than the creative side. And I remember having this sort of come to Jesus meeting with sort of the senior team from New York and the senior team from San Francisco on the editorial side. And I had this moment where I was explaining to them, I was like, look, we have this blog. It's this deep editorial blog, but in order for us to keep paying these people, we have to demonstrate to our superiors that it actually makes money. And I understand that when like my boss had actually told me, stop talking to the New York team about spreadsheets and returns and cost benefit. You're scaring them.
Yep.
I was like, look, I know now I've gotten this reputation, the spreadsheet guy, but let me explain. When I was in Too Much Joy, we were doing cost benefit analysis all the time. We just didn't think of it that way. Yep. When we got that $150,000 from Warner Brothers, right, to make the record of our dreams, there was a song we wanted a string section on. String section would have cost $25,000, which was, a huge chunk of the budget. Yep. So we had to decide, can we get away with just, mimicking it on synthesizers? Is that a better use of $25,000 to realize our artistic vision? So you're making these decisions as an artist, just as you're being creative as a business person. That's always been my experience.
Gotcha. So another question from the creative section here. So you came up with the band name Too Much Joy after a mushroom trip. What are your thoughts on drug use in the creative process? You weren't expecting these kinds of questions, were you? It's brilliant.
I was not, but I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah.
My thoughts with them are like, it's my thoughts with drugs, with any stimulant. There are some people that, should not do it. It is bad. And we had tour managers who were wake and bake guys. Like they literally could not function until they'd done their first bong hit. I've never been like that, right?
Yeah.
Drugs are dangerous. Driving is dangerous. Flying in an airplane is dangerous. Walking down the sidewalk is dangerous. I do think in terms of just getting past your internal censor, I found them particularly helpful. The joke of the name Too Much Joy is that one of the first times I ever did mushrooms in high school with Jay, we didn't know what to expect. So we sort of prepared the environment. We had guitars in one corner because we figured we might write songs. We had pads of paper and crayons in case we wanted to draw. We thought it was going to be this creative thing.
Yeah.
And we had like 8 amazing hours of basically playing all the records on, in my collection and bouncing off the walls. And I remember scribbling on a pad, and I woke up the next day and I remembered having this genius insight. I was like, oh, I know I wrote it down. What was it? And I picked up the pad of paper. It's just spirals. It's like filled with circular spirals and triangular spirals. It's just like ridiculous doodles that mean nothing. And in the middle of the page, in the teeniest, tiniest letters, literally the only 3 words I wrote were Too Much Joy.
That's awesome.
And we were in the market for a new band name. We'd originally called ourselves The Rave, which was very new wavy, and we wanted to get away from that. And we're like, oh, Too Much Joy. That's it. That's the bit.
Awesome. So this is a question from actually a former student of mine named Amishar, and he is a brilliant student and a super cool guy. So his question is this: is the future of the album really an app? I would love to hear more about the vision and work at Freeform Dev. In a market with too many apps, quote in quotes, how is the concept of the app album going to play out, and where might it lead us?
I would say it is not exclusively album as an app. In fact, I think album as an app is just a stepping stone. But so what we're doing at Freeform with album apps is, it's not instead of putting your music on Spotify or releasing it physically. It's in addition to.
Yeah.
But when you make your album an app, it can be a much richer, deeper, more engaging experience than it used to be. It drives me crazy. We're in this environment where there are more people listening to more music than ever before.
Yep.
And yet they're engaging with it in a much more shallow way than we used to, at least when I was growing up. When I got a new record, I would hunker down on the couch and I would just inhale everything that the artist gave me. I dropped the needle on the vinyl. I'd lay down. I'd read every lyric if there was a lyric sheet. I'd read every credit. I'd study the album cover. I'd look for secret messages in the dead space between the end of the last track and the label. And we've lost all
spirals.
That. Now, now records are literally just disembodied audio files in a square JPEG. That's depressing. And artists are still creating all this other content that goes around it, right? They're still doing packaging, just nobody's looking at the packaging. So when you make your album an app, you can add back in all that context that you used to get. You can have credits, you can have lyrics, you can have photos, all the stuff you used to have. You can also have stuff that wasn't possible in the olden days. You can have videos, you can have virtual reality experiences, you can have direct engagement with the artist. Nobody's going to want to have, I have just off to the right there, I have like still 1,000 vinyl LPs and more CDs. Nobody's going to want that many apps on their phone. But what we're trying to do is create a platform that lets you take all this content that's being created anyway, right, and just house it in a single centralized location. Ultimately, that shouldn't have to live. Ultimately, we want to get to a single freeform library app, where it would function like the Amazon Kindle app on my phone, right, where it's a single icon on my handset. I click it. It shows me the shelves. I've got like 40 books that I've gotten from Amazon, but it also gives me access to hundreds of thousands more, and I just pull down the one I want to interact with at any given time to my handset. We started with individual apps just because it's a lot easier to get people to say like, oh, hey, come listen to G-Eazy's new album for free than it is to say, come get this thing you've never heard of called Freeform that happens to have G-Eazy's new album. And ultimately, we want them, this is just a way of centralizing all this content that still exists for the album and putting it in a single space. And you can imagine all that stuff being revealed within Spotify or Apple Music just as easily as it is within these apps. Awesome. But nobody was building it, so we're like, screw it, we got to build it ourselves.
Yeah. So I want to this is a quote from you, and I think this is from 2014. I would trade in a heartbeat the ability to start my band today versus starting my band in 1987. I just think the opportunity is vastly superior. So we still on track with that? You still feel that way?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I was in a particular type of band, right? We were a club playing, left of the dial, sarcastic punk pop band. We weren't going for the golden ring. We didn't want to be Taylor Swift or Madonna. We wouldn't have minded, Green Day had a nice little trajectory, sounding a lot like Too Much Joy a couple years later. But that wasn't the goal, right? And I've said this before, so I'm kind of repeating myself, but what little career we had was based to a large extent on the fact that we got drunk with our fans after the shows. And that made them, that formed a bond that made them literally charter airplanes to follow us around when we weren't coming to their town. And that gave me, the ability to, have a name your own price campaign for Wonderlic, my goofy little side project. And the ability to virtually get drunk with your fans on an ongoing basis, given technology, it's just massive. I would things I would trade, things that I would be giving up for that. I would not get a $250,000 publishing advance. I recognize that. But that, that the thing of, and I wouldn't get that. We wouldn't have been given $150,000 to go make Serial Killers. But I would happily trade those things for a slower progression. I think I would have had a longer career as a musician, and ultimately more lucrative, but wouldn't have had the massive injections of cash every 3 years that we had in the early part of our career.
Yeah. So this is a question from Nico Noves. I'm recording an album with my band. I want to know if releasing the full album is worth it, or should we release each song at a time with a video clip? Now, to preface this, I get asked this question probably 5 times a week, probably 10 times a week when I was at PledgeMusic, because we focused on a unit of kind of delivery, but we kind of went backwards with that. Well, we had the content kind of beaten throughout the campaign. And on the Digital Trends and Strategies course, we have a lot of talk around this concept of like the drip feed of content versus the kind of, it's about that, if we're not, to which your point, the point you made earlier, we're not selling units anymore. So how would you advise Nico Noves? I hope I'm saying that right, Nico.
I would say there's not a single answer for every artist. Part of the reason, and I don't want to make this a commercial for Freeform, but one of the reasons we named it Freeform is we consider it a blank canvas that people should use to express their own unique vision, right? And what I saw happen at Google when I saw the mobile gaming industry basically do that 180 on their business model, it basically started with Angry Birds. Rovio was doing fine getting people to buy that on iOS, and they could not get people they could not get Android customers to purchase the game. So sort of like, they threw up their hands. They're like, we'll try a free version. And before you knew it, that version was making more money than the iOS version, than the paid version was anyway. And as soon as you had that, all these different game developers basically started imitating that and all innovating around the edges of that idea. So we want to do the same thing, right? Like the idea is with a freeform app, the app is free. You're not charging people for your album, but what free means, it's up to the artist to define. You know, for most people, it means you can play every track on the album once per day, and then they lock. And once they're locked, you have to take some action to unlock them. And that action can be clicking a buy button, but most people don't do that. So we're looking for actions that customers can take that don't necessarily cost them any money, but still generate revenue for the artist. And again, this is just what mobile games do. You can buy a lollipop hammer for $1.99 in Candy Crush Saga, or you can watch a commercial until you get enough credits to buy to acquire the lollipop hammer. Either way, whether you're spending money or not, the content owner is getting paid.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the different combination of content and offers to unlock that content that work, we know they're going to be different in hip hop than they are in country, than they are in metal. Yeah. So generally speaking, whether you start with a single whole that you then promote with various pieces of content, one by one after the fact, or whether you start with the individual pieces of content that get combined into a whole at the end, it's sort of, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. The fact is that whichever way you go about it, you can't just release it and then wait for the world to come to you. You have to be in a constant mode of coming up with new ways of calling people's attention to this.
Gotcha.
Right?
So this is actually, this is going to lead into a question I was going to ask. This is from Don Tony Maison, which is, his question is, 360s get a bad rap. Why? As in, I'm thinking 360 deals. And my question to you was going to be, what was it like to be signed to a major label? In that, for so many artists, it's their ultimate goal still. And so if you had someone saying to you, hey, I've been offered a deal for a bunch of money, it's a 360 with Warner Brothers, and they're gonna make me a priority, and all of the things that happen, because I get this all the time, honestly, like this. Do you look that artist in the eye and say, yes, that's the right move for you? No, it's not. Does it depend on the genre? Like, what's your thought?
I will give you the answer that I gave an actual musician who asked me this question. I think it was either in 1999 or 2000.
Yeah.
The latest it would have possibly been was 2001. It was a guy. I won't name the band because I don't have the person's permission, but it was a band that ended up on a major label, had some small level of success, although they're no longer extant. And the guy, I think he was the guitar player in the band, was working not as a temp. I think he had a full-time job at listen.com, but like basically doing data entry type stuff. And he was asking me, he said like, hey, should I take this deal? And the answer I gave him was, it depends on what you want. If you want to be Madonna, if you want to be a global superstar, then yes, take the deal, because that is the only path to that. At least it was in 1999 or 2000. I said, if you want to make a living making music, and if you want to still be doing in this band 20 years from now, do not take the deal. That was my advice in 1999. It's my advice today. It's not that labels are bad or terrible. It's just that they're, when Too Much Joy signed our deal, it felt like they were a necessity to get our records out of mom and pop stores and into, to get more distribution. At that time, the labels had a lock on sort of global distribution. Yeah. Now, anybody with a good microphone, an internet connection, and a laptop has a global distribution network at their fingertips. So labels are an option, not a necessity. I'd be very leery of a 360 deal. Yeah. So
and can you just give us a reason why? Well, why you think because that was obviously the gentleman's question. So what about the 360 is kind of like, I mean, I feel horrific about them, so full disclosure.
Well, that's what I said before. In the old days, everything we did was a commercial to get people to buy the album. Now the album is a commercial for the artist. So the idea of a 360 deal is, it's the label saying, we're going to make you famous, and once we make you famous, therefore we deserve a piece of your merchandising, a piece of your touring, a piece of any sponsorship deal you get, because we are the ones who have made you famous. And my response:
do you think that labels can make someone famous, or do you think it? Yeah, that's good answer.
No.
Yeah.
No, and the correct response to that, if you are an artist who is confident in your work, is no, my freaking music made me famous, right? Yeah. You got my work in front of people, but you couldn't have taken a potato and made the potato famous, right? Yeah. Otherwise, it would be an all potato world.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So no, 360 deals are horrendous. They are you know, they're sort of like the nuclear weapon of diseased label thinking, saying like, oh, you just go and be a creative artist and we'll take care of all the business, including getting all the money that ever accrues to you. You know, even the old way of doing things, the deal, you know, a major label deal is horrifying. The idea is, you know, I assume today people know how they work in a way that wasn't necessarily obvious in 1988, 1989.
You would be surprised. You would be surprised, yeah.
Let me just outline the insanity of it, because it really is nuts. The label advances you money to go make a product that they own in perpetuity. So in my case, you know, say with Serial Killers, we got let's just say we got $100,000 to make this record. You don't get any money from sales of that record until the $100,000 is paid back. So far, so reasonable. That makes sense. But here's the catch. The $100,000 isn't paid out of the gross sales price of the album. It's paid out of your share of the royalties. So if the album is being wholesaled, say, for $10, and I'm just, you know, I'm using even numbers just to make the math simple. If the album is being wholesaled for $8 and your share of that is maybe like for $10 and your share of that is maybe $1, as soon as the label has sold 10,000 units, they have recouped the $100,000 that they gave you to make the product that they now own in perpetuity. But your royalty statement says you still owe them $90,000. So you have to sell 100,000 albums before you have paid back the $100,000 they advanced you, at which point the label has grossed $1 million. At that point, you start getting $1 for every one of those records that are sold. And yet, the labels, now you've paid back the money they advanced you, the label still owns the work for eternity. So they have basically paid you to create a product for them and then charged you for the privilege. It's insane.
And I think one of the things that always shocked me is that when the 360 deals came in, let's say that you did break through, you were able to recoup. You were one of the 8 artists on earth that ever has, right? Because that was the other trick, is there was lots of ways that you wouldn't recoup. Suddenly, what you're sitting there is let's say that you make your first check of $200,000 and you get an invoice, which is like, oh, by the way, now you need to give us back a bunch for your publishing, your tour, your merch, and everything else that you've done. So yeah, it's a little, I'm with you there. So
let me just please extend this a little bit. You know, in retrospect, it was goofy to me when I had that Warner Brothers logo on my album back in 1989, I felt like I'd made it, right? Because I bought the lie. I was like, oh, that seal means like I am different than these other musicians because these people have now put their mark on me. And I signed this ridiculous deal in retrospect in order to get that. And I thought I was going in with my eyes wide open. Like I recognized I wasn't going to make a penny in royalties from the records. But I was like, hey, we hear these sounds in our heads. We can't afford to get them, you know, on tape. This will help us do that. And we love playing live, and that's how we'll make our money anyway. We sell a lot of t-shirts. So that was the plan. Didn't quite work out that way. But the crazy thing is I was happy to sign a Warner Brothers deal when Anheuser-Busch came to us and wanted us to do a radio jingle for their crappy beer. I almost quit the band because I got outvoted 3-1 that we would do the deal. And to me, this was a horrifying sellout. It was against all our punk rock principles. We never should have done it. And yet the thing is that I'm glad we did that because Anheuser-Busch, they paid us to make the ad. Every time the ad ran, we got residuals. We got so much money from the residuals that we finally qualified for health insurance through AFTRA, the singers union. I finally qualified through health insurance through AFTRA, which I hadn't through anything I'd done as a recording artist on Warner Brothers. That insurance basically gave my wife and I the ability to get pregnant and have our daughter. My daughter literally would not exist on this earth if I hadn't done that Budweiser ad. And so the crazy thing is, signing to Warner Brothers felt like making it. Doing a Budweiser ad felt like selling out. And yet the Anheuser-Busch deal was a much better deal. They gave us money. All they wanted was to stand near us, put their beer next to us, so hopefully some of our quote-unquote coolness would rub off on it, right? They paid us for the privilege. And they didn't say like, oh, you have to pay us back for all this money we spent making this ad that we own forever. It was a much better deal. Yeah. So a question on that, because I'm pretty passionate about this area of things, and this is, so I'm always concerned about the way that artists tell their stories, and there was a rash of bands, and I know a rash of artists right now who are like, I have to get my first brand play. That's how I'm going to get
made. And so it becomes, in the best case scenario, it works with an iPod commercial. In the worst case scenario, it's a shoe company. And I've spoken to multiple managers from, the Katy Perry level down to, the indie, and a lot of them have reported very mixed results. My concern was always, and you know this better than anybody, is the super fans, I think, are the ones that you have to cultivate. And so if you come at them with a brand that they don't like, do you think that there's a danger there? So what's your thought on the branding play? Obviously, in your case, it's got the positivity of bringing a human that you love into the world. But the second phase of that is that what was the cost, do you think?
Well, the cost is, it almost broke up the band. Right.
Yep.
I still to this day, I never touched my share of the money. I literally donated it to the ACLU Foundation.
Right.
It was blood money. I didn't want it. It was either that or buy 1,000 cases of Molson Golden, the beer I actually drank at the time. But my apartment was small and it wouldn't have fit them all. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but there's not a single answer for everybody.
Yep.
Right? There's different answers for different people. I remember.
So let me ask you. So because the specific one I want to get to is. Since you seem to feel, and I think you're right, which is that a majority of your work is going to be subsidized or funded by the superfan, do you think that branding can negatively affect the superfan connection? Therefore, you have to be careful of do you do it, or do you think it's just no, that they'll put up with it, they'll understand that you just need the money?
Oh, it absolutely can, and this is where I was going with that. There's different answers, like different products are going to work for one band and not for another. There's certain folks like Neil. If Neil Young were to do like Bob Dylan did a freaking Victoria's Secret commercial, right? Yeah. That's so weird and so perverse. Like, I don't think he lost a single fan from that.
Yeah.
Whereas if Neil Young were to do the same thing, oh my God, he'd be such a hypocrite.
Yeah.
It's very easy when you're Neil Young to say, I'm not sponsored by anybody, because you don't need to be anymore, right? I remember when I heard a snippet of a Luna song in a Calvin Klein perfume ad, and I was happy because I felt like Luna was getting more out of that transaction than Calvin Klein were. Yeah. So for me, and I wrote a long paper about this that I presented at a pop conference once. It's actually on my website. Maybe I'll tweet the link out afterward.
Sure.
And I came up with this sort of calculus, which is I do think I look at it like a math problem, right?
Yep.
And you have to look at the potential sponsorship and say, okay, who is coming out ahead in this? Is it the brand or is it the band?
Yep.
And if the brand is coming out ahead, don't do the deal. If the band is coming out ahead, do the deal. Yeah. And the impact that this particular brand is going to have on your super fans is one of the inputs into that equation.
Yeah. And in your experience, do most artists understand the difference between a super fan and a casual fan? Like, are they thinking along those lines? And when you think about Freeform and the types of apps that you're helping facilitate here, do you have a say in it? Is it kind of, let them roll with it, or what's your thinking around that?
We try to advise on best practices, but again, the company's called Freeform. It's like, it's your vision. You do what you want. And so I don't think people do have a sense of it. I think they have an intuitive sense, just from, especially if you're the type of act that performs live. When you play live, there are people at the front and there are people at the back sort of talking. And your job as a performer is to get people to stop in the back, to stop talking and just start paying attention, and then hopefully to move closer to the stage. Every performing musician has that thing where, there's that magical force field at the front of the stage that people don't want to get too close. And you learn early on that, like, you have to break through that. You have to get people to want to be at the foot of the stage. And you want as many of them as possible. So, when I say ARPU, that sounds like, MBA technologist talk. It's really just, it means superfan. Average revenue per user. Increasing average revenue per user means turning people who've never heard of you into first, casual, making them aware of you, turning the people who now know that you exist into casual fans, and then turning as many of those casual fans as possible into super fans. That's what increasing average revenue per user really means.
Gotcha. So,
and another way of looking at it is, it means getting the people who are talking at the back of the club to shut the hell up and come to the front of the stage and start slam dance.
So you've led me beautifully to I'm going to quote you again, because you are so quotable. Capturing people's attention and holding on to it is the fundamental challenge for artists and labels and their managers in the 21st century. So I just finished reading the book on attention harvesting. The Tim Wu book, I think it is. It's a remarkable book. So capturing people's attention and holding it is the fundamental challenge for artists. Do you still think that that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And can I share an illustrative anecdote that's hilarious?
Yeah, please, go for it. Yeah.
I was at a conference in Norway, of all places, with a bunch of people, talking about music and technology and trying to make labels and technology companies not hate each other so much. And Bertus Downs, who'd worked with REM for years and years and years, was one of the people at this conference. And he and I had a flight out of Norway to Amsterdam at roughly the same time. So we were gonna share a cab from the conference. We had to leave a little bit early. And so we met and we walked outside the school where the conference was being held. And he turns to me and goes, "Oh, I hope you don't mind, but instead of calling a cab, I have an REM fan is picking us up." I was like, "Really?" And tell me the story. He's like, "Oh, I'm this guy heard that I was going to be, he saw on Facebook that I was going to be in Norway, and he told me he was REM's #1 fan. So I actually had drinks with him last night, and I don't know if he's their #1 fan, but he's definitely their #1 fan in Norway. And when he heard I was going to the airport, he offered to drive us." And he's like, "Is that okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, it's fine." He goes, "We'll either get to the airport for free or we'll be axe murdered." And so the guy starts driving us to the Norway airport, and he asks us what time our flight is, and we tell him, and he goes, "Oh, great, you have time then." And he pulls off the highway at this exit. He goes, "I have to take you to my house." And we're in the backseat of this guy's car, and we're looking at each other like, "Oh my God, we're being taken to some farm in Norway where we're going to be dismembered." And so he pulls up in front of his house. He goes, "Come, come, come." And so we get out of the car and we follow him into the house, and he literally opens the door to his basement. He goes, "It's down here." And Bertus and I look at each other. We're like, "Do we want to go into this maniac's basement? I don't know." And so we go down, and finally we're like, he's not really going to dismember us. So we go down into his basement, and he's got like this shrine to REM that he wants to show us. And he just wants to show us all the REM paraphernalia that he's collected over the years. He's got like 5 LP copies of Reckoning. And he's like, "See, do you see the difference?" And I'm like, "I don't." He goes, "The font is different on this one from this one." And Bertus is like, "Even I didn't know that." And then finally, at a certain point, we're sort of clearing our throats and going, "Well, we better be getting back on the road." He's like, okay, I will take you to the airport now." So we get back in the car. He takes us to the airport. We get out, and he drives away. And Bertus Down turns and looks at me and goes, "Well, it really is an attention-based economy, because that ride was not free."
Yeah.
We some of our attention for the ride.
Attention
and the thing
merchants.
And he just had such a strong connection with the band, and he wanted to share the depth of his love with a guy who he knew the band, and just driving him to the airport wasn't enough. He had to see the collection. It was just I'll never get over that.
And if the music industry had its way, it would send it straight to a streaming platform where he could pay a maximum of $9.99 a month. So a couple more things before we kind of end, and I end these interviews with the same question, but so what's harder, business or music business?
Oh, music business. Music business. I mean, and as a startup guy in the music business, you can't. There's all the possible capital that you can raise in the world, and then there's the capital that you can raise for a music project. So there are VCs who used to fund music companies who just don't anymore. And I can't tell you how many pitches I never got to give, just because as soon as an intro would be made to somebody who might potentially want to invest in the company, and as soon as they heard it was a music play, they would say things, and I always got very similar responses, which was, "Sorry, we don't do that anymore. Too many irrational actors." And that is that phrase, "too many irrational actors," has just stuck with me, because that defines the music business. So actually, I want to ask one more question, because this one just came in from Aaron Mayer. Is there still a viable musical middle class? Oh, I mean, going back to that other quote when I said I would trade in a heartbeat, starting my band today for back then, absolutely there is a viable musical middle class. And, I mean, I'm trying, in fact, I will, again, I don't want to make this a free-form commercial, but when I did the financial forecasting for the company that I had to present to potential investors, what I explained was, this is not a superstar business. We need a couple of platinum artists to demonstrate that the model actually works. And it's not a long tail business. We're building an open platform. We want anybody to be able to use it. We don't lose money on long tail artists, but they don't make enough money for that to sustain the company. This company is based on the fact it's based on the Wilcos of the world. If you can get 50,000 installs of this app, you know, if you're someone who has fewer than 1 million fans but more than 10,000 fans, and you know, if I can get 3,000 Wilcos on the freeform platform, I have a sustainable business. So awesome. Not only do I'm literally putting my money where I'm metaphorically putting my money where my mouth is, in that I am building a business based on the assumption that there is that not only is there a middle class, is there a possibility for there to be a thriving middle class of musicians, but that my platform can enable that, and that I will benefit as a result. Yeah, but mostly the world will.
Awesome. Can you go on for an extra minute or two? Is that cool?
Oh,
quick question. So this one came in from Mike King, who's one of the Berklee team. Where do you focus most of your efforts right now? Is it in the platform? Is it on partnerships? Is it marketing? And I'm gonna hazard a guess that it's probably all of them.
It's all of them. I mean, the one of the funny things I learned at Google was that it doesn't matter whether you're a 5-person startup or you're Google, right? There are always more things that you want to do than that you can do. And the hardest thing for any business at any level, whether you're an entrepreneur who's all by yourself or whether you're part of this huge multinational conglomerate, the hardest thing to do in business is to pick the things to focus on and just focus on them. So for us, I mean, basically we've had to stop doing individual apps to focus on building the platform. And we've had to defer, hiring people to build out brand partnership teams. Ultimately, we want to, in addition to the platform that lets anybody create a mobile app very quickly and easily, as easily as you create a website, we want there to be a sponsor marketplace where there are sponsors coming in and bidding to be in these apps. But that's, I don't know if we made the right decision emphasizing the platform over the sponsorships. But we have limited resources, limited time. I would rather, the best thing you can do, and I think this makes sense in music as well, do one thing as well as possible rather than 5 things mediocre.
That's great advice. So I have to ask a quick question. So Google, evil, a bit evil, not very evil, or I can't say?
My answer is the same for Google, for major labels, for anything. There's a natural human tendency to vilify. The thing about conspiracy theories is they're comforting. They're like religion. We want to believe there are people in control that have a grand plan and can execute it, right? It's mostly, any company that, as soon as you get more than 5 people, really, all of a sudden you have conflicting agendas and you have gossip. There is no such thing as a company that is good or evil. It might have, I do think things flow down from the top, and if you set, you have to set some principles and actually walk them as well as just talk them. In that regard, my experience at Google was majority wildly positive.
So that principle of don't be evil, that's rock solid there.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. The thing is, unless did Hitler walk around thinking he was? I'm not comparing Google to Hitler. In my experience, evil people don't think they're being evil. It is possible to walk around thinking you're doing great good and actually be screwing up a bunch of things for a bunch of people. But generally, in terms of the way they treat their employees, Google walks its walk as well as talking its talk.
Awesome.
They treat their employees really, really well. And I've been at companies where that is not the case.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask my final question now, and this is actually one that I got asked on the Future Music Coalition a panel once, which was, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about the music industry, what would it be?
Okay. I'm gonna go broad here. In my experience in the music industry, there are, generally speaking, 2 types of people. And this goes for musicians as well as executives at labels. There are people who, when they are presented with a new possibility, their first reaction is an optimistic one. It's like, oh, how can this make me more money? Or how can this improve things? And the other class of people, their first reaction is a negative defensive one, which is, how is this going to take away from what I already have? And I think the story of the sort of stunted evolution of digital music compared to the explosive growth of digital gaming is largely the story of the defensive people being in control. So if I could wave the magic wand, I would make all the people whose first reaction is, it's a zero-sum game, how is this going to take away from what I already have? I would turn them into the positive people whose first reaction is, oh, how can this add to what I already have?
That's awesome. Beautiful. Well, Tim, thanks so much for your time. I want to thank Mike King.
This was great.
Yeah, this is awesome. I want to thank Mike King, Jesse Borkowski, whose name I horribly pronounced last time, Jana Jackson, Kaylee Kravitz, Pat Healy, and all of the amazing Berklee team. This is part of the Berklee Online Live series, and I'm Benji. Thanks again, Tim, so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Josh, as well. Cheers. He's great, Tim. I didn't want to answer the questions, which were more like, how do I get my band signed, etc. That's